Hola, I'm Gerson Borrero. Welcome to City and State TV. This is part 2 of the interview with Nelson Antonio Denis, the activist, the researcher, the book writer, and we're going to be discussing the book that he's just written about the history of Puerto Rico. Things that you have not heard. They're known to everyone. This is not a novel. It's not a Hollywood script. It's actual history of the relationship between the United States of America and the territory that is known as the island of Puerto Rico. Listen to this. I want to get back to the book. I mean, you didn't start being concerned, like many Puerto Ricans myself, you didn't start being concerned with the war against, I find the title fascinating because people will say, well, who's got the war against Puerto Ricans? And basically you're saying it's the U.S. government.
Well, actually, there's a real story behind this. I feel that there's a war against all Puerto Ricans every time I pay my taxes, every time I look at my,
Why?
But, oh, well, that was a joke. But,
I feel that way.
But on a serious note, this actually had a very specific agenda. This war against all Puerto Ricans were the words that were uttered by the chief of police of Puerto Rico. His name was E. Francis Riggs. There was an island-wide agricultural strike.
Who was not Puerto Rican?
No, absolutely not. He was Yale educated and very much not. His father was the president of the Riggs National Bank, which was known for financing and destabilizing a lot of regimes in South and Central America. And the bank was finally closed when they got caught laundering money for Agustin Pinochet in Chile.
Right.
E. Francis Riggs was sent to down to Puerto Rico to help stabilize, quote unquote, the situation, together with an army general named Blanton Winship, who was designated as the governor. Why did this happen? Because Albizu Campos, the principal, not the founder, Pedro Albizu Campos, the president of the Nationalist Party, had been writing editorials, holding meetings, giving speeches, touring through South America, making his presence felt. The United States could care less. The First Amendment was alive and well on the island of Puerto Rico until there was an island-wide agricultural strike in January of 1934, which brought the economy to a standstill for about 2 or 3 months. And there was a meaningful negotiation which actually ended up doubling the workers' wages, los macheteros, the sugarcane workers, in Puerto Rico from $75 to roughly $1.50 a day for a 10-hour day. That was actually, that was a big deal. That was amazing. They doubled their wages, 15 cents an hour, but it meant there was a difference between starvation and not to many of these people. Albizu Campos was brought in by the macheteros to lead and negotiate the terms.
Those sugarcane workers.
So he led this strike. Originally, it was supposedly led by the labor leaders, the Federación Libre de Trabajadores, the FLT, but the rank and file found out that those leaders in the union had sold them out in exchange for comfortable government jobs in San Juan.
Right.
That's when they went to Albizu. Albizu led the strike. When he led that strike is immediately when Blanton Winship and Riggs paid attention to him. That's when Riggs invited Albizu to El Escambrón to a lunch where they offered him large sums of money and
to buy him off,
and also to buy him off politically, and he didn't go for it.
This is not a novel. This is actual history, documented. You have over 100 pages of actually documenting where this all comes from, but you've also, in this excellent tome, you've been able, that is a must read for anybody who's really interested in terms of what government has done, and U.S. government, our government here in the United States has done to a territory known as a colony, which isn't allowed to be either a state or an independent nation in the Caribbean, but rather left in limbo so that it can continue to be exploited. And I think you and I agree with that, anybody that knows the history, which you've documented here for people to read. It is also, in the documentation and the story you tell, which isn't a novel, this is not fiction, this is based on research. How many years did you spend researching the book? I know you've lived it since you were in the university, and you did go to Harvard, but then you graduated from Yale Law School, and then you've lived through this, and you've always been interested, like many Puerto Ricans who are, looking after truth. I was born in Ponce, and you start documenting 1950, the same year that I was born. So I know about Don Pedro, I know the history of it. What of particular interest or of shocking value would it be for people who don't know anything about the atrocities that the U.S. government has committed in Puerto Rico? What would be most compelling to draw them into this? Is it the violence, like the Massacre de Ponce that occurred? Is it on Palm Sunday, unarmed civilian population on a peaceful march? Take us through that incident, because I know you documented here. There's a particular violent scene here, but inside the book you also tell of what happened on that day of the Ponce massacre.
Okay, let me use as a departure point, because I just, the title. Let me just give you the point, because actually that encapsulates what I think is the tone and the prevailing feeling of the book. What I was about to get about Riggs and the title of War Against All Puerto Ricans, when that strike happened and the government, the U.S. government was very unhappy, they started assailing, assaulting, provoking all the nationalists. And they assassinated 4 of them in what was known before the Ponce massacre was the Rio Piedras massacre.
Yes.
In October 24, 1935. And as a way of excusing that, when they killed 4 nationalists in broad daylight, they just assassinated
By
them.
the way, let me just emphasize for those who may not be following this, these are U.S. citizens. These were U.S. citizens that were gunned down, as you say, police.
And so they killed them just for being nationalists. When asked to explain that in a press conference, the police chief Riggs, Yale-educated Riggs, son of the Riggs Bank president Riggs, told the island-wide press, knowing that they tell everybody, he said that if people kept following Albizu Campos, and if Albizu Campos kept stirring up the macheteros and the college students, that there would be war to the death against all Puerto Ricans.
That's the title.
That's the title of the book, and that's actually a perfect way. And you that was a perfect question for you to follow up with about what is the prevailing feeling of the book, because it stems from the title. The subtitle of the book is Terror in America's Colony, and so that's the feeling. It's the terror, because when you can not only kill people, but when asked to explain it, you say, "I'm going to kill more of you if you keep it up and see where it's going to get you." And in fact, what happened just 2 years later is precisely that. In the Ponce massacre, you had the same insular police force which had been fully militarized after Albizu Campos led that agricultural strike, killed 17 Puerto Ricans in broad daylight during Palm Sunday, and that's why it was in Ponce, and they called it the Ponce massacre. Some other people call it the Palm Sunday massacre.
Right.
Shot openly the machine gun for over 10 minutes. A crowd that was unarmed, that was simply marching peacefully in Ponce to celebrate Palm Sunday and to support Albizu Campos, who at that point was in jail. 17 people killed, over 200 wounded, and dozens of people maimed for life. In addition to that, you have the Puerto Rican government starting to collaborate with it. And this is where unfortunately, you have to read the book. I don't mean to plug the book, but...
But it's his actual history, and you've documented what happened.
Because what happened is that the deal that was offered to Albizu Campos, that he rejected, was offered then to Muñoz Marín. And Muñoz Marín took that deal, hook, line, and sinker. And let me just say, Muñoz Marín helped sponsor the terror, because he passed Public Law 53, which was known as La Ley de la Mordaza, which made it a crime punishable by 10 years in jail if you sing a tune, hand out a leaflet, hold a meeting, speak a word, virtually have a thought. It was almost a thought police on behalf of the independence of Puerto Rico. In other words, the First Amendment no longer existed in Puerto Rico.
Couldn't even fly the flag because you were labeled the Puerto Rican flag.
Yeah, but even more than that, not just fly the flag, and this is a key distinction, own a flag. Because if you have ownership of a flag the size of a postage stamp in your home, that authorized the police to bust down your door without a warrant.
Look, we can continue talking about this for another hour, but I've got to tell you that in the context that we're talking about this is not a made-up history. This is not a Hollywood script. This is an HBO special. This is actually happened in a territory that the United States invaded in 1898. 1917, they imposed citizenship. Some of the things that people may know or not know. The fact is that, and some people may be offended by this. I recently observed, actually shed some tears, going back to the Selma March over the bridge. I'm sorry, but we have a situation in which people were gunned down on U.S. territory by U.S. forces. Nobody remembers. Nobody reports on it. Nobody has ever told. A movie hasn't been done by Hollywood to say how these people on Palm Sunday, unarmed, women, children, and husbands, family, gunned down. And I think that the context, this is the importance of your book, what you've done here, because it just puts a reality check on what it is that we focus on, with all due respect to those in Selma that took the beatings, including a Congress member, John Lewis, who we adore, and we're glad that he survived. Can you imagine that happening in Selma, if they had opened fire like that? And what happened in Ponce? I mean, what were we doing right now? So that context, Nelson, you also mentioned that the sellout of Luis Muñoz Marin, who actually, I think, sold out Puerto Rico. They couldn't bribe Pedro Albizu Campos, who was the nationalist leader. They did bribe. You went into FBI documents, what they call las carpetas. There was a process of actually espionage or actually people who were helping the FBI and snitching on Puerto Ricans. How many of those carpetas, of those folders, did the FBI accumulate on Puerto Ricans?
And that's part of the answer as far as the psychological, the outlook of Puerto Ricans, the Puerto Rican personality, and the terror that they felt. It was a very internal, it was like a slow burn, because not only was there a public law against them, not only was the police militarized, but they were being followed, people were followed all over the island, and not just a small group. There were over 100,000 secret police dossiers, FBI files, called carpetas, over a period from the mid-30s to the mid-80s. Over 100,000 files.
In an island that didn't have a population 3 million at that point.
Yeah, had about 2 million at the time. Now, when you think about the process and the human interactions that comprise that, in order to create 100,000 files, you have to have a hell of a lot of informants, because the informants are the ones that provided the data for those files. The FBI didn't know. Most of the FBI agents didn't speak Spanish. Or if they did, they certainly were recognized. So these informants, the vast majority of them, were Puerto Ricans. So this is something that goes into that over 2 generations, I believe, affected the Puerto Rican character.
Based on the research you did.
Yeah, but also based on human intuition. Think about this. When you have 100,000 carpetas, you have to have many thousands of informants. In the top 20 towns of Puerto Rico, you have to have hundreds of informants in each town in order to generate those carpetas. And a lot of these people would know who they are. A lot of them, they wouldn't know who they are. You might have people informing on other people in their own family. So what I'm getting at is that if you've noticed, and this is, and I don't mean to air any laundry or anything, but when people talk in the dead of night, one of the things we talk about is sometimes our inability to get together and to really unite. And that there's always somebody pulling the way, quítate tú pa ponerme yo, the Puerto Rican crab, where people are always pulling each other down. I think that part of the DNA of the Puerto Rican personality, unfortunately, derives from 2 generations of the FBI pitting brother against brother on the island.
Of a real colonial mentality and a real DNA that has been embedded in our way of doing it. I leave you with this because we're going to wrap this up. The book is War Against Puerto Rico, all Puerto Ricans. There's on page 100. Just quickly explain to me. There's among the documents that you uncover from the FBI. There's a lot of redacting here, but who is this file on?
This is on Luis Muñoz Marin, who at the time was the most powerful politician in Puerto Rico. He was not governor yet, but he was the president of the Senate. He was the head of El Partido Popular, the PPD, right. And he owned a newspaper called La Democracia. He was the top guy in Puerto Rico.
Luis Muñoz Marin, the first elected governor of Puerto Rico, but he was actually imposed by the United States. They reached a deal with him. That's known.
Well, the deal was cut. It was a deal that was offered to Albizu Campos. This document is dated 1943. Shortly after he became the head of the Senate and clearly the most powerful politician in Puerto Rico. What this document shows through multiple FBI informants, and it says it, I mean, in black and white. In addition, there was a history of Luis Muñoz Marin having to have discussions about this in his own party, these personal habits that he had. It wasn't just in this document, but this is the government of the United States now that has this information. What this document says, amongst several things, is it ends with that it is known by multiple informants that Luis Muñoz Marin is completely irresponsible, reported to be a heavy drinker and narcotics addict. This particular report and a couple of others that are discussed in this book about Luis Muñoz Marin tied him to a lifelong drug habit, he smoked opium, and to obstruction of justice, because there was a case against him that he was able to squash. But let me just make this point really quickly. The United States used this report because they never disseminated it. They kept it secret. This was classified. We only found out about this in the last 10 years. The United States had him on a very short leash, and it was after that that he stopped being an independentista, after that report.
Nelson Antonio Denis, thank you so much for writing the book. Thank you so much for still being active, and thank you for telling the story. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of invitations. We need to go through it, pick out some things, and I can't wait for us to talk about the current structure of Albany, because I think you really know a lot there, and you know the place. Some of the plays are still around. Nelson Antonio Denis, best of luck with the book. I think I suggest, look, I'm telling you, War Against All Puerto Ricans, if you want to know the real deal in terms of what the United States has done to a possession, an island that they took over, a territory of the United States of America, this great democracy. I'm Gerson Borrero for City and State TV.